Thank you. Conflicts of interest obviously serves as a reminder that if there's anything that comes up during the course of our meeting that presents a conflict, that should be made known at that time. Item 4, public forum. There is no public forum today. Item 5, confirmation of the minutes of our meeting of the 15th of October. So we've got a recommendation that the minutes be confirmed. Is there anything that people wanted to raise in relation to those minutes before we confirm them? Jane.
We have an additional recommendation that was included to add to the SmartGrowth Partnership terms of reference, the requirement to approve it and monitor the so just that terms of reference will be changed at what meeting? You know?
So that's referred to in one of the reports that's coming up. And in fact, there's a recommendation at the end of the quarterly report, I think it is, where we're proposing that we wrap that change up with any other future changes that's to be made. So if there was any discussion on that, that might be the time to raise it, but there's a recommendation that we just hold that one over until there are other changes that need to be made rather than going back to partners just for that one small amendment. Given that we acknowledge at the last meeting, yes, last week, now, Thank you. Is there anything else that anybody wishes to raise in relation to these minutes?
Yes, on page 30, there's on the bottom there, where two-party update paper. Second to last bullet point, one key proposed action is to develop a joint agency group JAG to oversee multi-housing delivery across the sub-region. I have issue with that when so I was only skim reading and I didn't realise the implication that it was going to make when, especially at our last CTWF week. So I don't know how to word this, like, take that point out. The joint agency group, because we've only just started discussing that as a group, kind of the federal group. And there was certain resolution that was made at the CTW, but Waitangi Marae that asked instead of establishing the group, that we needed more discussion on.
Right. So in these minutes of the last meeting from October, so what we really focused on is whether what's in these minutes reflects the position as it was discussed at that time, realising the discussions may have moved on since then. So if you're comfortable in that context, I think we can obviously know what they're saying, but at the same time, as long as you're comfortable that these minutes reflect the situation as it was at 15th of October, as long as you're comfortable, we can move on. Cool. Yes. Yeah, thank you. Anything else that needs to be raised in response to on relation to these minutes? All right, so can I have a mover to confirm the minutes, please? So James moves, Stuart seconds. All those in favour say aye. Against, that's carried. Thank you. So the next item is the quarterly report on page 20. So Craig, I'll turn to you to introduce the quarterly report. Thank you.
Chair, just a couple of quick updates, but you're taking the read. Paragraph 3 refers to project planning for this corridor, and I think everyone's aware that last week it was noticed that the Minister of Finance, Minister of Housing, decided to reject the SDP, building code Western Corridor. So that's out of the equation now in terms of planning process for that corridor. Just updating in terms of the SDP for the Western Corridor, that the minister's decided to reject the Kaimura recommendation to set that up. So we're back to conventional methods of dealing with long-term planning in that area. Another comment I wanted to make, and that's in relation to the communications and engagement plan. Talks in there about an annual review, but clearly with changes occurring in roles and relationships very quickly at the moment, the Smart Growth Management Group will keep that plan up to date each quarter that it meets. The intention is once a year there'll be an overall update and review. We're trying to maintain some transparency around how those communication channels work. So those are my updates. Happy to take any questions.
All right, thanks, Craig. Any questions for Craig? Stuart.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. With the government not proceeding with KO's plan with regard to that part of Eureka next year, I'm assuming, what would be the recommendations? Because a lot of good work was done in that study, a lot of time and effort, money, potentially some good housing outcomes there as well. What would SmartGrowth's strategy be, and how would that fit under our strategy and setting with the funding and financing arrangements, etc., etc.
Well, I can't speak to the detail of that, but I can say that the intention is to carry on with the long-term planning for the corridor, and that is signalled in our implementation of the funding plan, regardless of the SDP or otherwise.
So Marty, you've got a comment here?
Yeah, so James and I spoke to Chris Bishop, and I guess just some background, they're looking to transform Kaimura, and basically didn't feel like they were necessarily the right people to deliver, and in some ways, I guess we probably agree, around that SDP, but Minister Bishop certainly gave us the undertaking that they still saw it as a pretty good option, but felt that potentially what regional deals was the new mechanism to be able to deliver that. And so I guess the challenge to Smart Growth would be, what are the tools that we need for us to deliver that. So that would be very much the sort of background that
Thank you for that. Also aware, Chair, that potentially the line of that was also the unfairness. So there's that in any shape or form.
Thank you. Any other questions or matters we should raise in relation to this report? Further, so we've got recommendations on page 23 to receive the report, and then James is the recommendation that I was referring to earlier, agrees that the wording of the delegation to approve the IS5 to be clarified when the SLG agreement is next updated. So just holding that until any further updates, and then we've got the submission to the our basis spatial plan and Eastern Bay, which is attached as an appendix, and recommendation 3 is to retrospectively endorse that recommendation. So,
Thanks, Chair. Just with regard to recommendations, through the matter of council, participation, and that's make a note of these.
that's it.
Because we're right in the middle of basic hearings.
Yeah, absolutely. Understood. Thank you. All right, so can I have a mover then for those recommendations? James move, and a seconder. James seconds. All those in favour say aye. Against, that's carried. Thank you. So now moving to item 7, to category update on page 41 of our agenda. And Sophia, welcome to the table. Good to have you with us. Thank you.
Mōrena tātou tūtahira, tūtuku hiarai, te karapia i tima ka mai rai, te hapa nei ki kuinga, I te ata nei, mihi nei ki atu ki Elijah, tuku nei na whakamohi ti whakari tātira ki aia. So yes, the tūpakari update report, on those pages, I just want to pick up on the issue that Whitiora is raising around the joint agency group. So the joint agency group, kaupapa was raised at the September Kawaitanga Whenua Forum meeting at Ngāti Moko. It was on the agenda for discussion at Whitiora Te Rangi. And so we've got the opportunity to work those terms of reference for the SmartGrowth Kawaitanga Whenua Forum, and then the 3 forums that follow underneath. And that'll be one of the agenda items that we put up on the first workshop that we will have as a combined time forum, as a follow-up action from Whitiora Te Rangi, and that should address the issue that Whitiora is raising about the joint agency group. It is a key component to the whole delivery of what I sent as a portfolio of projects, because it brings all of the agencies together. So as the reports that follow on after ours, the trends report, the TCC review around how things are going, it's clear that those trends reports and what they're saying is that one sector cannot do it alone. TCC can't do it alone, Western Bay can't do it alone, regional council can't do it alone. It needs a collective approach. And clearly one of the significant issues that we've got for all of the projects in the PDA is around the coordination of meeting that funding deficit. There's nothing different about housing on my land as well. And hence that's why Tokakai is one of the PDAs that is reported upon. Because it is a critical action around getting all the partners together around it. So it is an important kaupapa that will be addressed. That is around.
So they haven't let you in? No.
Okay, I'll let you in. Don't mind, I don't mind. So that's where the joint agency group fits in terms of bringing all of the agencies together. Once we've got to the stage of enabling embody land trusts to deliver on their housing plans. So happy to take any other questions.
Thank you. Any questions on the Horizon 5?
So is that to be going to be reworded to reflect what was reworded at the CTWF at Waitangi Marae last week? That was just to note about the joint agency group proposal. And we needed us as part of the federal to need more discussion on it, because there was some debate that we over the JAG proposal compared to funding the Aroha.
So I guess this is about timing and sequencing of the writing of the paper and then that's us to through. Was there anything to do with that changes your recommendation in this paper?
No, it doesn't. It just sees in 2025. It will be doing that in 2025. So I think the recommendation is actually fits and supports what came out of the need to have another report, which was agreed to, and we'll have actually for the first commodity.
So the recommendation still stands in effect for your support.
To me, that says we are going to establish it. That's not quite. So thinking of kind of a better way establishing. There was some concern about another governance committee, blah blah blah, around to attend through the other. So long as there's the understanding that, even though it says the establishment of the SmartGrowth Village Agency Group, it's not a given. For definitely. As long as it's, for us, it's something to feel. Yes to one, yes to 2A, no to 2B.
So the recommendations seeking the support of SLP for the establishment of the realising that there are other discussions to take place next year. And that's part of the context of that support.
What it does say around establishment with the appropriate terms of reference. So those will be decided by the combined as we see it.
Carry on with the vote. I'm not happy with that explanation.
Or do you want to add some additional wording, noting that the concerns of reference will be discussed by CCWF and so through?
That, I mean, it's already got there, but to the reference, I'm saying, noting that, Tangata Whenua may want to support the other Tangata over this JAG group being established.
The problem, Mr. Chair, is that we're talking about two totally different cohorts. Other tangata in the joint agency group are two different cohorts.
Comes to my core thinking of that, as far as I'm concerned, is not enough resourcing or actual Tangata group apart from three forums that we through the ROW and the Western Bay forums. That's through legislation. As I keep saying, every hui I'm at, we are not the landowners, it's how we may get a bit of land back through settlement. The Māori Land Trust own 90% of our land. It can be that public finance can be thought.
So clearly there's some further discussion to occur in that other forum. That's your.
I choose the there was no was really discussed in the chat. I think there were some new members that arrived that day that this whole thing is taking use and this whole SmartGrowth strategy is taking use. But I think Pure is right that there is going to be more engagement around the JAG establishment, the development, whatever wording it is, coming up in 2025.
So we could, if it provided with that comfort, add some additional wording, noting that further discussions and engagements are to occur in 2025. And that's a statement of fact, but it may provide a level of comfort, but we're not saying this is a done deal. We're noting that there are further discussions to occur early next year. So if we can add those words, it may solve the issue. Yeah. So just adding the words to the recommendations, so recommendations to B, noting that further discussions and engagements are to occur in early 2025. Seconds, so moved by Matera, seconded by Ricky. Nothing else anyone wants to raise on this before we take a vote. All those in favour say aye. Against, that's carried. Thank you. Okay, so now moving on to our next item, item 8, the TSP quarterly report on page 45. And Dean Kempton, good to have you with us this morning, and Sean, welcome to the table as well. Inviting you to present the report. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. We'll take the report as read. I'll just note the governance arrangements for the Joint Transport Committee, the Tauranga Western Bay Transport Committee, has been, the terms of reference been sort of mentioned that they were going to the councils, so they've been approved by CCC and regional council. So in 2025, that committee will be stood up. And we've had a conversation with Winston Bay, and the staff are happy with it, and they'll bring it through the council for approval in due course. Any questions on the board? Thanks.
Thank you. So we'll take the rest of the report as read, but yeah, are there any questions?
I've got one question in relation to paragraph 19. You state that our lovely new Manawatu Bridge is going to be 4 lanes. Is that definite? Because you might ask me for one, it's only going to be 2 lanes. Paragraph 19, page 4. 19, page 4, paragraph 19.
My understanding is the bridge has been future-proof for 4 lanes. It's not been built with 4 lanes.
So 4 lanes. This case is going to be built 4 lanes.
Okay, I'll note the correction. Thanks.
Any other messages raised in relation to the TSP? Nothing further? All right, so we've got then a recommendation on page 50 to receive the update. I have mover, Diora, and seconder, Jane. All those in favour say aye. Against, that's carried. Thank you. Thanks for the report and the presentation of it. So now moving to item 9, the fast track approvals on page 63. Craig, I'll hand over to you for this one, but noting the colours involvement in the report as well. Right.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, the report provides some background. On what the fast track approvals actually means in practice, the sort of process that will be followed for those. And we've identified there the projects that are relevant to SmartGrowth and the rest of the sub-region. The issue arose at the last meeting around alignment between the SmartGrowth strategy and fast track, and some commentary there around the 4 infrastructure projects, in one, the Taurika West housing and land development project being aligned, but the 2 projects, Bell Road and Tara Road, being not included in the FDS. There's a map there showing the location of those. And noting here that both of those projects were dealt with through the submissions on the strategy earlier this year. And then while there was some upside on those in terms of location and other considerations, there were some significant issues identified around natural hazard risk issues. So the fast track application process, if those applicants proceed with that, an independent hearings panel will now deal with those issues. The other issue dealt with in the report is the response of SmartGrowth to fast track, and considered there 4 different options for how we can do that, ranging from a do minimum, which is really just a watch and brief, through to more stronger monitoring role. The third option is to incorporate fast track housing and land development projects as part of the PPA tracker, and to use the mechanisms already in place for that. And the fourth option was more of a SmartGrowth-led technical leadership option. Just noting there that Future-Proof have more or less landed on an option 4 approach with quite a strong role led by Future-Proof team there. But we're recommending this, was discussed in detail with the SmartGrowth implementation group a few weeks ago, recommending option 3, which is to incorporate the fast track projects into the PDA tracker from this point forward. And there is a report later in the agenda that covers some of the detail here. So those are the highlights of the report, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you very much. And yeah, particularly noting the discussion at the last SLG meeting and at the last SGIG meeting, and Craig, your comments around future-proof response, but the 4 options set out in paragraph 17 would be good to have some discussion on this. James, will be first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a little uncomfortable with making these PDAs. I've gone through the strategy process last year, just to now make them spread out in PDAs when we don't know the feasibility. Makes it a little bit uncomfortable. However, I do think we need to recognise reality and where the government is going. I think it's probably probably dealt with by language, just don't call them PDAs, called fast track development opportunity, monitor them and keep a close eye on them. And at some point we'll need to make a decision in the very near future about whether we're going to fully support it or so. I think there's just a language around that. But we need to recognise where the government is at.
So in terms of recommendation 2, you were suggesting a wording change. So rather than saying being treated as priority development areas, what wording would you want to get announced?
Yeah, so I think we should treat them as PDAs all but now, but I think I don't really want to call them PDAs just principle. So I just call them fast track development.
So in terms of that recommendation, so fast track housing and land projects been treated as, or do we just say in the same way as the PDAs? That would, yeah. We're not saying that they are equivalent to PDA, we're just saying treatment will be the same.
Yeah, I think the key thing is I don't want to be seen to be opposing them at this point.
Yeah.
The process, they've got to a gateway and they're going to be financially have to decide. And at that point, that's when we can really make our decision about how to trade going forward.
Yeah. So I mean, we could even add a wording there noting that further decisions are yet to be made. Yeah. All right. So if we change or proposing, then we change recommendation 2, approves fast track housing and land development projects being treated in the same way as the priority development areas, to be monitored and reported on by SmartGrowth partners through established processes, noting that further decisions are yet to be made on these projects. And I think that just puts it in context and puts up James' point you're making. Yeah.
On behalf of the regional council, we have to support it, recommendations. I think we need to keep an eye on these projects and within the PDA report is a really good mechanism, and we can separate them by terminology. I've got comfort in that now the process is becoming clearer. We know that councils have had the opportunity to have input via a report through the hearing. And should they approve it, then that's the decide what type of application. So support on behalf of the regional council.
So you're comfortable, Jane, with the new wording that we just talked about? Yeah. So noting that these are not PDAs, but we'll treat them essentially alongside the PDAs, realising that the fast track bill takes them to a particular gateway with further processes to follow, further decision making to follow. Thank you. Right.
Yeah, I also support Mayor Denya's approach. I think by bringing them into PDAs immediately, we're making a mockery of our planning, because obviously it was being considered and now we're saying there's a backdoor in. And I think the change of wording I think deals with it because it's not that we're against them. It's just that we need to consider that and look at the ramifications before bringing them in. So very much support that few words. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Visual.
Yeah, on page 63, 3D, the Port of Tauranga Limited is still a passive infrastructure project. I feel like I could be shooting the messenger here because it's the port that has put that up on the fast tracking agenda. But considering full-on Waitarangi against that whole thing, but the Environment Court has awarded it really, and we're just going through some technical discussions, I suppose, with the port on how they're going to fund some different things on there. This is going to be up front here, and I'm okay with what you've got here and the resolutions apart from that D, and I'm actually going to be voting against that if that can be possible within the resolutions here, 1 and 2.
So 3D.
Because I should have declared my I'll say conflict of interest, if you can call it that. I've submitted against that. And the rest of Waitarangi, and I've been involved with Waitarangi's journey with the port on trying to come to some sort of agreement, or like I said, on certain things. So at the moment, as a whole, I'm saying yes to it, apart from the 3D.
All right, so 3D is presented as a statement of fact as part of the report, so it doesn't form part of the resolutions that they're saying. Obviously, you've made some comments on that, but there's nothing in the resolution that expresses support or otherwise for the statement of fact at 3D.
Okay.
Yep. So, yeah, I mean, I think you can be comfortable voting for the resolutions, realising that that's just a factual statement in the report. Yep. Anything further that people want to raise in relation to any part of this report? Ricky?
Probably something to consider, especially if we're going to change the terminology of the view of priority development areas to fast track development opportunities. Is keep in mind we've got a lot of opportunities in multi-land and island development as well. So I know that there's one project here on Port Secure has been mentioned, but we've got a vast land tracts out here that can be developed as far as multi-land is concerned.
Yeah, and realising that the initial list of fast track projects may not be exclusive, and maybe other projects to be added in future tranches. Stuart?
More things change, the more they stay the same. In 2014, the then Minister of Housing, Nick Smith, put an amendment to the RMA for special housing areas, and they actually worked. And TCC, we used it to speed up a lot of housing, particularly in Patamā and Beckland. The point is that was done as an interim fix to the RMA 10 years ago. So it's the fix.
Thank you.
I guess may or may not change the resolution, but we recognise that just because they're in the fast track list, it doesn't mean that these projects will go ahead. It just says that they have entered a process. So I'm hoping that the resolution doesn't assume that we are going to take for certain that these things are going to happen. So part of the measurement may well, or part of the watchful eye may well be to note that when something does not go ahead as a result of them failing some other part of the process.
Yeah, and I think the changed wording in some ways does pick that up, that these are not PDAs, that we'll monitor them, and we realise that there are further processes to be undertaken. As was said earlier, The fast track brings these projects to a particular gateway, but then there are other processes to follow from there. I think that's understood, noted, and implied as part of our resolution in the context of the report. But certainly a good point. Anything further that people want to raise? Any further questions for Craig on the report, or anything people want to raise by way of discussion? All right, Craig, you're comfortable with the change wording in the resolution? That's capable of.
Yes, I am, and definitely the intention was never to make these PDAs. It was to use the same process we have for reporting on them, because I've got the right people at the table for the PDAs, same people who'll be looking at the fast track projects. So it made sense to bring them into one reporting line. So I think the changes clarify that intention.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Excellent. All right. So with that changed wording, can I have a mover for the recommendations? James will move, and a seconder. Jane seconds. All those in favour say aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you. All right. So moving on to the next report, item 10, the implementation and funding plan progress update on page 67. And Craig, over to you again for this one. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Just to introduce this item, we have developed a way of reporting on the implementation and funding plan, which is presented in the appendix to this report. And our thinking is to bring forward some of the highlights into the front of the report for those who don't want to have to read through 8 pages of detail. And yeah, Nicole and I have worked on this a bit, trying to come up with an approach which is useful, provide some transparency and accountability around what we've done, what's ahead. But yeah, definitely it's a first report on progress, and yeah, welcome any feedback on the information that's in there. Some of it is still a bit sketchy because we're sort of early days on some of these actions, but the other thing to highlight is we've grouped together looking at the next quarter, and that's the delivery program for key actions January to March. We've tried to be really transparent about what we're working on in the next quarter. And the corollary to that is what we're not working on. These are the focus issues for the next 3 months across the partnership. The last part is just looking at IFP updates, and with the SmartGrowth, with the operating environment statement forming part of the implementation and funding plan, we're keeping a monitoring, watching on government policy shifts. We don't think there's anything substantive enough to warrant an update of that at the moment, but definitely into next year with the going for housing growth announcements and national policy direction, we think there's probably going to be the need for a pretty substantial update at the end of the next quarter. So we thought we'd hold over anything until then, out of that one update. So you're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. So any questions on this report, particularly also any feedback on the information in the appendix or the way that that's presented, and any comment on the proposed work programme for the next quarter as well? Is there anything that people want to raise there? James.
Thank you. Very much following on from the last discussion, I just wonder, is there any work in the work programme about integrating the fast track projects into the plan? Because presumably there's some work will need to take place to work out, how we can accommodate them or not.
There isn't indirectly, because we are continuing to work on improving the PDA tracker process. So that will also incorporate improvements in the way we deal with the fast track project reporting. So if you look at the work ahead there, 6C, the protocol for supporting delivery of PDAs, you could probably say, and also fast track projects, it's part and parcel of that.
So it might be good to, particularly given the earlier discussion, I think that's taken as read, but it would be good in future to specify that. And obviously we'll be keeping a close eye on the progress of those fast track projects and be reporting accordingly. Anything further to raise on this report? Nothing further. So we've got recommendations then on page 70. Just come to those recommendations on page 70 to receive the quarterly report, and obviously any discussion on the focus of the work programme. There's nothing people want to raise there that hasn't been raised already. All right, so can I have a mover then for the recommendations? So John Scrimger and Stuart. So John moves, Stuart seconds. All those in favour say aye. Against, as carried. Thank you. Now, just because of timings and availability of external parties, we'll switch items 12 and 11. So we've got the development trends report on page 133. Have we got the people here that we need for that report? We don't. And we also don't have Penny Perez, who we need for item 11.
We may have.
Okay, just one moment. So can we do the development trends there? All right, great. Yeah. Great. Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was thinking. All right, so it looks as though we're in a position to go to the development trends report next. I'm just checking at the back of the room if we're good to go. Yep. All right, great. So let's now move to the development trends report on page 133. So welcome presenters to the table. Looks as though our timing was perfect, or your timing was perfect, one or the other or both, but good to have you with us. And we've actually moved quite quickly through the early part of our agenda, so we've probably reached this item a little bit earlier than we thought we would. That means that we do have time for a presentation and any questions, obviously, on this report. Thank you.
Good morning, Natalie Rutland, the Environmental Planning Manager from Western Bay of Plenty District Council. Here and the report writers and people behind the scenes that are here today to talk a bit more about the Development Trends Report, the information that goes into that over the last financial year. So we've got Chloe from Western Bay of Plenty District Council and Jane to take us through it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So, yeah, the next part of the meeting is all yours for the presentation, and then we'll move to any questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Jane Mercado, and I'm the planner for growth research and monitoring. And my manager is Ave Greenway, and our division manager is Andy Mead at the back. So we are presenting to you the 2024 Development Trends Report. Next slide, please. It is a technical report produced by partner councils every year, and it contains the trends in new dwellings built in new lots via subdivision. It also contains the dwelling sales, prices, rents, and housing affordability, housing typology, development capacity, business land, and non-residential consents. It is a requirement by SmartGrowth, the regional policy statement, and the national policy statement on urban development, and it covers the annual period from the 1st of July to the end of June. Next slide, please. For our key findings, first is that residential building and subdivision activity have both slowed down this year. Our dwelling consents has declined, this is for the sub-region, by 34%, and new lots declined by 10% this year compared to the previous year. We also found out that dwellings and lot sizes have become smaller over time. You will find the details about this later on in the presentation. The slowdown reflects the broader economic pressures of higher interest rates and inflation in building costs. We also found out that other growth regions are seeing similar trends, so we are not isolated in this case. Next slide, please. For our new dwellings, the sub-region has 782 dwellings consented in 2023-24. You will see that we have seen peaks and troughs throughout the 28 years. And Tauranga City has 40% decline this year compared to the previous year, and Western Bay has 17% decline compared to the previous year.
You will see through over time in that chart that there is around about a 7-year cycle of ups and downs, which happens over time. So given after the peak of 2017, where there was a lot of subdivision activity out east in Tauranga and Paispa and Bethlehem, you'll see that Tauranga drives that main sub-regional trend, and that we are approaching a level that we've not seen since just after the GFC, but we would also expect that that will start to come back up again in time as the cycle does. Yeah.
Next slide, please. Okay, we are seeing a similar trend for our new lots created. In the sub-region, we have a 10% decline this year compared to the previous year. That's a net for the sub-region, because in Tauranga City we have a slight increase of 3%, equivalent to 16 lots, and a 34% decline in Western Bay for 94 lots. Next slide, please. Compared to our projections, our dwellings have a 0.6% decline compared to our projections. That's equivalent to 532 dwellings. That's from 2018 to 2024. Next slide, please. For Tauranga City, for 2023-24, we have 500 new dwellings consented, and 59% of these are located in the urban growth areas. 20% is located in Wairaki, 41% in the infill areas, and in the infill areas, we have 36% of the dwellings consented. All of the urban growth areas have declined in dwellings consented in the year compared to the previous year, except for Bethlehem. Bethlehem has 58 new dwellings consented, attributable to the 53 apartments consented in Bethlehem Shores. Next slide, please.
We have presented Western Bay slightly differently because we have a number of small urban areas that make up the district rather than the city. So the purple line in particular is Omokoroa, showing that it had a peak in new dwellings in 2021, and then development has dropped off in that area as the market has slowed. The school being put on hold there is having some influence, and yet we have new consents come in just this month for 72 new lots by Lighthouse Group, and we have Blackridge coming in early January with some more, and Neil Group. So Omokoroa is picking up again in terms of activity. We're just waiting on those consents to come in to see the scope of those. Otherwise, our rural new lots tend to still be at a decent level. Te Puke has been going well, and in the north, Karikari and Waihi Beach have tracked along pretty steadily in terms of new lots and new dwellings.
Next slide, please.
Oh, sure. This is based on information that SmartGrowth already has regarding other development regions around the country. In the recent census, it showed that pretty much all growth is around the main urban centres. So you see there future-proof Hamilton Waikato, which is, you know, around Hamilton City, Wellington, Horowhenua,
Queenstown Lakes is obviously experiencing quite high growth in adjoining districts. There's SmartGrowth, Western Bay of Plenty, and Greater Christchurch and Auckland. So showing that the dip that we've seen, this being our third year, is mirrored in those other growth regions, are experiencing the same issues. Yeah.
Slide, please. As you can see, the median selling price is increasing. And in June 2024, it's 875,000 for Tauranga City and 1 million for Western Bay. And compared to June 2023, Tauranga City has a decline of 4% and Western Bay has an increase of 10%. This is the average dwelling median, average of the median selling price. It's a 12-month rolling average. So it's essentially lower than the average market price. Next slide, please.
As we know, over time, rents are just steadily increasing up to an average of 578 for Western Bay and 667 for Tauranga City. So both up 6% in 1 year. And by the way, we're not, I think, telling you things that people are not already aware of, but they are just particular to our district, the figures that we see here. Thank you.
And it is also a 12-month rolling average.
Yeah.
Next slide, please. Our mortgage affordability has improved since June 2022. It was at negative 60 something. And it has improved to, although it's just a little bit higher than zero, whereas there was no change compared to the previous year. It was 1.1 for Western Bay and 0.3 for Tauranga City. Next slide, please. For deposit affordability, it has improved since from March 2022 to March 2023. It is above zero, but still a bit lower because it's 5% in Western Bay and 4% for Tauranga City. Next slide, please. Okay. In terms of the dwelling size, our average floor size in 2007 is 196 square meters for both Tauranga City and Western Bay, and it has gone down. It has gone smaller to 130 square meters in 2024 and for Tauranga City and 157 square meters for Western Bay. Next slide, please. The construction cost is soaring and it has reached above $3,000 per square meter in 2023, and now it is 10% higher for Tauranga City compared to the previous year and 13% higher in Western Bay compared to 2023. And for the sub-region, it has doubled in 7 years.
That's a huge driver of, I guess, house prices going up, costs going up, and floor sizes coming down in a bid to make houses more affordable, given those costs.
Next slide, please. You will see from this slide that there's an increase in the lot size of 176 to 325 square meters. It is now the prevalent lot size at 39% in 2024. So it's in 2019, it was the same. It almost has the same proportion as the next two bigger sizes, but in 2024, it is now the prevalent lot size.
Which is based on intensification and having more dwellings per section, yeah.
Next slide, please. Next slide, please. For dwelling types, there is a growth in attached dwellings in the sub-region, and there is a decline in standalone dwellings and retirement village units. The attached dwellings now have a proportion of 36% and standalone has 54%. So compared to 2019, you can see the visual difference there, the yellow being the attached dwellings. And the blue is the standalone dwellings. And I must also add that attached dwellings here are composed of the duplexes, the multi-units, and the townhouses. The retirement villages, the retirement village units, there are also standalone duplexes and attached dwellings within the retirement village, but we just counted them as retirement village units. Next slide, please. In terms of the number of bedrooms, from 2023 to 2024, there was a switch between the three bedrooms and the 2 bedrooms. The prevalent number of bedrooms is still 3 bedrooms, but there are more 2-bedroom units in Tauranga City and more 3 bedrooms in Western Bay. There is an increase in 2 bedrooms and also a decline in 3 and 4 bedrooms. For Tauranga City, the most prevalent is the 2-bedroom dwellings, whereas in Western Bay it's the 3-bedroom dwellings. Next slide, please. For our development capacity, for the sub-region, we have 27% remaining and 23% for Tauranga City, and for Western Bay, we have 33% remaining. Would you like to add something?
There's a lot of data on that slide. So it just basically shows that different urban growth areas, which is how we cut the data, show different capacities remaining. For example, Waihi Beach has only 9% remaining because it is now up against hazardous land in the coastal area, whereas Omokoroa still has 49% capacity remaining. So it differs by urban growth area. Pies Pa is almost tapped out, and there's still remaining capacity in Bethlehem, and Wairaki only has a small amount left as well. So just different capacities for different urban growth areas across the sub-region.
Next slide, please. Yeah. This slide shows the...
We might take questions at the end if we can. Yeah, if we have the whole presentation, and then there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end. Thank you.
We're nearly there.
Yeah. For business land, the darker ones there in that slide are the occupied areas, and the lighter colors are the vacant industrial land. So we have vacant lands in Tipuki, Katikati, Tipuna, Omokoroa, Waihi Beach, and Paingaroa, and in Tauranga City, in Mount Punganui, Tariko, Tamanga, Arupi, Wairaki, and Greerton. Next slide, please.
Oh, just a small comment on that is that the largest areas of industrial land remaining are obviously at Rangiuru, and there's a fair amount in Tipuki and a smaller amount in Katikati and Tipuna. But it is not all actually available with infrastructure supplied as yet. Yeah.
We have a total of 142 consents of non-residential nature. But in terms of the new buildings, in Tauranga City, we have 44 new buildings and 9 new buildings in Western Bay in 2024. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Would you like to?
The end.
Okay.
So in summary, the decline that we're seeing in the number of new dwellings and new lots is cyclical, as we've observed before in the sub-region. It is largely down to economic conditions where interest rates are high, and luckily they're coming down, but and there was a huge boom in people buying owner-occupied property after COVID when the world was ending, and everyone quickly used the cash that they had in low interest rates and bought themselves a house. So that seems to have steadied, and we do expect that in time that the demand that we have seen in this area will continue. Obviously, migration is having an impact as well at the moment, so with some of our younger people leaving the area. So we will see how that plays out in time and whether that will rebuild demand in the next year or two. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much indeed. So now let's move to any questions or comments or discussion, and Jen, we'll come to you first. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. So just on your dwelling capacity slide, go back to it, would be useful.
Slide 19.
Yeah.
That one, yeah. You had it. So can you just explain, so I see Tauranga's got 23%, so can you just explain what does capacity mean? So does that mean that we've got 23% more houses than we need for a current population, or consents? Where's the capacity sitting, please?
That is the remaining capacity for dwellings, and in each of those urban growth areas, we have the dwellings yield for each of those, and as of June 2024, that second column there, those were the total of the dwellings consented since 2018, if I'm not mistaken. So and then the remaining dwellings. So the remaining capacity is the remaining dwellings divided by the total yield.
Based on the amount of land that we have, of how many houses are built and how much land is remaining for potential to build.
So under current planning allowances, we've got there, just having a look at Tauranga City, we're saying that there's 6,700 more houses could be built currently. 6,700 could be built under the current planning consent.
So those are the greenfield urban growth areas only. But that is correct. Not that 6,700 could be built. If you built to the full plan enabled, 3-story terraced houses, it would be a lot more than that, but we don't expect people will deliver at those densities. So that's at expected densities. But those numbers don't include intensification that is also expected on top of the greenfield dwelling capacity. So that's just limited to our greenfield urban growth areas. I think in the slides we were showing something like a third of development is currently being delivered through intensification at the moment. So that's on top of the capacity shown in that slide.
Sort of unclear what capacity it's. I'm not sure why we've got the slide. What's the message we're meant to be getting out of the slide? Sorry,
yeah, so so it's a good point. So the key message in this slide is that for the greenfield urban growth areas that are zoned, most of the development capacity in those areas has already been built out. So it has a total capacity of about 47,000 homes. 34,000 of them have already been built. and they've been being built since the 1990s. Around 12,000 more dwellings are expected in our greenfield areas. About 25%, about a quarter of the capacity remains. And that is, I guess, why we're relying on intensification, but also zoning new greenfield urban growth areas, because we're planning for I think across the sub-region, over 40,000 dwellings over the next 30 years, but only 12,000 of those are expected in our existing greenfield urban growth areas.
All right, thank you. Don.
I never question like like Jen, but two quick comments. And our deputy mayor's far too modest. But I have to acknowledge Te Puke has been our star performer this year. So that's just to my colleagues at council, because they'd want to do that. And just my last comment is my first iteration around Smart Growth Table when Stuart and Jane were here. The thought of going from 12 dwellings per hectare to 15 was viewed as a bit of a challenge, really. And we wondered how we were going to do it. But obviously we've got sick of mowing lawns, Stuart, and we've given that one up and chasing 30 now.
Yeah, Jane.
Well, just a comment, the average sale price in Tauranga, from a conversation I had last night, it's more the fact the prices aren't going down. It's just that the higher price properties are much stickier in the market and are much slower to sell. So, as interest rates eases, that's probably going to change, I would think, as people are able to stretch their budgets a little bit further.
Thank you. So you talk about the cyclical nature. You referred to it across a couple of the slides. And on the new dwelling slide, there's a really steep decline that brings us about to the same level as the GFC numbers that you referred to. Are you expecting that to keep declining, or are you expecting it to bottom out quite sharply?
MB have produced a state of the nation sort of building expected report. They expect us to still be in that dip this coming year and then to revive in 2026.
So that may in fact see the dip go lower than it went in the GFC years if it continues to decline at that really sharp rate.
Potentially. Sorry, I'm not sure how.
Yeah. I mean, obviously this is predictions, but interesting. All right, thank you. James.
Well, one of the interesting slides that I noticed was the dwelling consented over the last 20, 30 years, which is on page 137 of our agenda, but it's also up there. And you can see that 2017-18, we really started going backwards relative to our competitor growth areas. They all charged ahead and we sort of stagnated or went backwards. Do you have any insight as to why that was? Was that when land sort of started becoming scarce for us, or explain that one?
We're just finding the right slides so we can all see what.
So this is referring to the slide where we compared to the other centres, and Auckland and Christchurch obviously were moving at quite a different rate. I think it was that one just there. There we go.
Yeah, it's hard to see it with the Auckland one in there, but if you look 2017-18, we sort of slide backwards, and Auckland and Christchurch and Wellington and Hamilton are sort of charging ahead, and Queenstown as well. That's where we're sort of losing ground. Obviously, there's been a big retrenchment since 22, but it was at 17-18 where it looks like we went backwards.
Yeah, or we were sort of flatlining as others were going upwards at best. I think, growth is probably dominated by Tauranga City, so probably 75-80% is generally in the city. And I think that does coincide with the time where we really started facing the challenges around limited greenfield land supply and the delay in zoning the new areas. But also at that time, We faced some significant delays with delivering what was Plan Change 26 around intensification. We had to go back to the starting line as the government introduced the medium density residential standards, and we lost probably 2 years with that zoning process. So I think it's those two factors combined. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Stuart and then Ron. Stuart.
Oh, thank you. Just briefly, you can actually learn a lot from history. So yeah, thank you for the report. It's quite interesting. I think the key takeouts is actually around planning and planning for the future. And I do recall even in 2007, 8, 9, during the GFC, Tauranga City Council still invested heavily in lead infrastructure. And that's what you have to do because you know you're going to come out of it and you have to be as best prepared you can when you come out of it. So that's one takeout. The other one is there's so many factors that we're not in control of. And, we just have to acknowledge that, but keep our heads down and do our own thing and push on as best we can, both in zoning, both in green and brownfield, and in lead infrastructure for those new urban growth areas. The other, I don't think it's kind of right to compare ourselves with Queenstown. You don't want to go to Queenstown at the moment unless you want to walk a long way. Each area has different dynamics. The earthquake created a lot in Selwyn, for example. Selwyn's not up there. I don't think it might be part of Greater Christchurch, but Selwyn, and still is, went absolutely nuts in terms of new dwellings, and was the lead for many occasions because there was a reason for that, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think, and this is where SmartGrowth, I think, does have a benefit where we do have that sub-regional spatial plan. It's had its ups and downs, but what we're in control of, I think we've done okay. Yes, it's going to get harder and harder as greenfield sites, particularly in Tauranga, become utilised, and that's where again SmartGrowth comes into play in terms of the relationship with Western Bay District Council.
Thank you, Ron.
Yeah, my question is around in any one of these factors is interesting, but really it's all combined. So the average price coming down, but also the average lot size and the number of bedrooms is reduced, and some is infilling and some is greenhouse. And I really want to know whether you've got any understanding about whether people are making good decisions because there's been unaffordability, so we'll just get on the property ladder sort of thing. So are we seeing what people want, or are we seeing what people can have in the moment, and how do we make sure that our planning reflects what people will want if that's the case? That makes sense?
I think there's quite a difference between what people want, ideally, versus what they can afford. And so everyone has to make trade-offs about, I guess, the choices around where and how they're housed. And I think we're seeing that coming through quite clearly as prices are going up, both the cost of new houses in general, it's a slight dip recently, but the cost of building new is getting very expensive, and therefore houses are getting smaller, sections are getting smaller to achieve a price point that's still unaffordable, but people can still, raise the mortgage or pay the rent. I think that's the nature of what we're seeing. We're also seeing, I think, more people living together. So we were expecting to see a decline through recent censuses in the number of people per dwelling, but we're actually seeing that stay steady or increase a little bit. I think as kids stay at home longer, so they're going to university and staying at home, or more people are living together to split the rent, that sort of thing. So we're certainly seeing, I think, the challenges that we have in the housing market play out in the trends that you see as presented by the team today.
I guess the supplementary to that is are we noting that and taking that into account of our planning, rather than saying, well, some of this might be short term, but we're planning long term?
I think we are. I think the challenge is it's unlikely that we're going to see building and development costs come down. So I think, while we're maybe incomes go up over time to make things more affordable overall, I think the trend towards more compact housing is here to stay, and we're certainly pushing that through our planning by having even higher densities above 15 as being required to make sure we get that mix of housing typology that people can afford, rather than catering maybe solely for those people coming out of Auckland who are after, the larger houses, that sort of thing.
Perhaps I could just add, I don't think the Development and Trends report itself sort of has that purpose of doing that second step analysis, but it certainly provides a useful reference to pull all of those different factors and levers into account for those other pieces of work. Yeah.
Thank you. I've got Ricky first and then Whitiora, I'll come to you, Ricky.
Wonder if we can go back to the per square metre cost for average houses. I think what we're having a look here is maybe an adjustment to our culture as Kiwis. We spoke about it in the SmartGrowth forums where it was brought up probably about 6 years ago that the quarter acre dream as a Kiwi is no longer realistic. Interesting when you have a flooring size per square metre flooring size. Okay, so if you have a look at about 3.5K per square metre, the house sizes have gone down significantly at the moment in the construction industry. We're building around 120, 150 squares compared to 8 years ago, a lot bigger. You have a look at the flooring cost on average. It doesn't mean the construction industry, us tradies, are actually making more money. The ratios, the costing ratios actually start getting a little bit messed up. So the prices actually get higher. Not only that, our staff and us tradies still have to pay rent in Mount Maunganui where we're working as well. So I just wanted to raise the issue around housing affordability, whether or not we actually use that terminology anymore, because being brought up in at the mountain in Arataki, we've got a large swathe of people, our own whānau, having to move out of the area. Which is quite sad. They're getting replaced by another population, and like one of the graphs stated that somebody mentioned that a lot of our young ones are actually shifting over to Australia, got better opportunities over there as well. So I just wanted to make that point. And another issue I think we've got in the next year is having a look at the trends of the amount of residences being built. If it's going to plateau for another year, we've got a major issue in the construction industry. A lot of us tradies have to pay rent. A lot of us tradies will have to probably shift into like another part of the industry if it's going to plateau for another 12 months. So that's I'm remembering the pain that we had to go through during that GFC issue, and it dragged on for probably about 4 years or so.
Thank you. Whitiora.
It'll be interesting if you could separate the Māori land and the Papakainga from all of those averages there, because basically if you're getting a Papakainga project and maybe 10 Papakainga on some land, they're going for the cheaper option of the 2 bedrooms and attached. So most of the Papakainga that I know of have gone along those trends there. Like I said, I just wouldn't mind seeing a bit of a separation of the Papakainga and all of that going along with those averages and all of that, because it'd be quite interesting for me.
Thank you. Don, back to you.
I just want to circle back a little bit to what Deputy Mayor Jen raised before about the capacity, because then if you bring in Te Tumu and Taurika West, you're adding another 9,000 to that number, so it's not quite as grim as you do. And I guess because I was down there on Saturday and visiting the Papamoa East interchange from the inland side and seeing all those 3 lanes and traffic lights and everything, it just shows the possibilities that are there. The infrastructure's there. We fought so hard to get the TEL. We're getting the interchange. So really that is another 9,000 properties that open up. So it's not quite as grim as the 5. You add the 2 together and it's a big number.
Any further questions or comments or matters people want to raise in relation to this report or any of the slides? Nothing further? All right, so we've got a recommendation then on page 138 to receive the key findings in the report. So thanks for the presentation and thanks for the answers to questions as well. Yeah, it was certainly great to provoke some good discussion there. So we've got those 2 recommendations. Sorry, we've got that recommendation. Do I have a mover for the recommendation? So Jen moves and Don seconds. All those in favour say aye. Against, that's carried. Thank you. Now, I just need to check where we're at in terms of item 11, the housing delivery report, because we are running a little bit ahead of where we expected to be. All right, so apparently we can move straight into item 11, the housing delivery report. So we've got Penny Pirrett online, the author of the report, who's able to present. And again, we'll take the presentation and then move to any questions or discussion at the end. So Penny, good morning. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And thanks for your flexibility with the timings this morning as well. Just checking that you can see and hear us okay. And I'll just check that we can hear you okay as well before we move into the presentation.
Yes, I can hear you very clearly and I can see you all. Hopefully you can see me as well and hear me.
Yep, loud and clear. So that's great. All right, so this time's yours. We've got the 2 appendices in our agenda today, so your full report and also the slide presentation as well.
Okay, Juanita, are we going to get the slides up on the screen?
Just working on that right now.
Right, while they're working on it, just a bit of an introduction. I was asked by Tauranga City Council to do a review of their progress on housing and land supply. I understand that the full report is attached as part of your agenda, as is the presentation I gave to Tauranga City Council. So I've got a smaller presentation to quickly run you through, and then we can get into any questions you might have of the work. So next slide, please. Okay. So this is the purpose of the review. I'm not going to read through it, but it was something that Tauranga City Council was keen to understand just how well they've been doing in this area. Next slide. So the approach I took to the review was in 2 stages. One was around a desktop review of the various documents that were provided by council staff or I sourced online. And then I did interviews with 4 council staff and 14 external people. Those external people involved a number of developers that work across the Tauranga district, representatives from NZTA, SmartGrowth, Kāinga Ora, Ministry for Housing, and also a consultant that is advising the council on a range of matters, Joyce Advisory. The second stage was using all of that information to assess council's progress on enabling land supply in the 3 priority growth areas, Te Papa, Taurika West and Te Tumu, and then looking at progress on enabling housing supply in Te Papa. The other 2 aren't at a stage where houses are being built, so housing supply was just focused on Te Papa. Next slide, please. So the review really concluded that Tauranga City Council is considered to be a proactive council that is doing as much as possible within its statutory and financial powers to enable development capacity. Many of the external people I interviewed really reiterated the fact that they thought the council was pro-growth. It is an active member of SmartGrowth. It has been actively progressing spatial planning, structure planning and plan changes into Papa and Tarika West, and has committed funding for key infrastructure in both Tarika West and in the Papa priority growth areas. It is one of the few councils across the whole of New Zealand who have amended its district plan to comply with the medium density residential standards and to increase height in its city centre, town centre and public transport route. There is some improvement that could occur in terms of the consenting and approval practices across the council. Next slide, please. So these are the key barriers that I think are more relevant to smart growth. There is obviously a physical constraint that exists within the Tauranga district, and that's discussed in my report. But in terms of the key ones, I think a really major one that needs some real work on is central government policy, infrastructure and funding. There is a lack of recognition by central government of the critical roles it plays enabling land and housing supply. And that's really shown through a limited recognition. I mean, there are some ministries and departments that recognise it, but largely there is limited recognition of the development capacity enabling dwellings actually requires a coordinated and committed approach from central government over many years and across multiple government agencies. The fact that there are often isolated and uncoordinated or 3-yearly changes of policy or projects creates uncertainty and additional costs. It delays when land can be developed for housing, and it sends mixed messages to local government in the market. And there's been a number of these that have impacted quite significantly in the Western Bay of Plenty. There's also Competing Resource Management Act national direction. So it requires local government to provide for greenfield and brownfield growth while also protecting and enhancing biodiversity, freshwater bodies and highly productive land. And in some cases, all of those different directions come face to face and there's no guidance or little guidance on how to make trade-offs between those often competing national outcomes. Next slide. So this is something that I think is really starting to have an impact on the ability of Tauranga City to meet the requirements under the MPS urban development, because the requirements under that MPS is that you have to have 30 years worth of development capacity that is planned, enabled, i.e. zoned, infrastructure ready. So either you have the funding for that infrastructure or that infrastructure funding is available in the LTP and is feasible and reasonably expected to be realised. While I do applaud aspects of the MPS and urban development, I do believe that it's sort of come a bit late to a situation where many of the Tier 1 and 2 local authorities have been grappling for many years with how to balance the competing national direction, how to fund and deliver infrastructure, and how to secure central government long-term commitment to deliver growth-related infrastructure. And all of those councils has been focused on delivering additional dwellings, but also on creating sustainable communities and neighbourhoods. And sometimes the feeling is from central government is that it's a numbers game as opposed to actually creating communities where people want to live and work. It's difficult, or if not impossible, to identify with any certainty what will be feasible in 15 to 30 years. And if you think about things that have changed in 15 to 30 years because of different technologies, market preference, political and economic conditions, it's really difficult to understand what might happen in those later periods. An example of that is Hobsonville in Auckland. Those of you who know my background know I come from that, from Auckland, and the reality is 15 to 30 years ago, Hobsonville was an airport. It was the Air Force's base, and now it is a thriving mixed-use development, very much seen as an exemplar of intensified development. But that was not something that was feasible 15, 30 years ago. And that's the real crux of it. It's not about planning for 30 years worth of development. I think that is a worthy thing to do. But having land that is 30 years, providing 30 years capacity that is feasible and reasonably expected to be realised without knowing what might be around in 15, 30 years is a big ask. The NPS central government, the National Policy Statement on Urban Development is actually requiring local governments to make medium to long-term development capacity assumptions and funding provisions based on today's market in isolation of knowing those future conditions. And it also fails to acknowledge that cross-central government decisions can fundamentally affect what is enabled and what is feasible development capacity. Next slide. The last barrier to the housing supply won't be a surprise to any of you, is the funding of growth-related infrastructure. Local government has limited or partial tools available to finance the cost of new water, wastewater, stormwater, bulk infrastructure or capacity upgrades, and also the social facilities needed in new urban areas. Central government obviously provides partial funding for non-state highway transport projects, but as has been seen in Tauranga, that's subject to changing central government policies and priorities, the instance being the second phase of the Cameron Street upgrade. Alternative funding has been provided through the Crown Investments Partners Infrastructure Financing and Funding Levy, but that has its limitations, particularly where there are multiple landowners. The cost of the required infrastructure is high and it's difficult to determine who benefits. And so local government has been signalling for a while that other financing and funding tools are needed to enable more infrastructure to be built. And an opportunity might become apparent through the regional deals process that has recently been announced by central government, which signals that if you are part of a regional deal, then other financing and funding tools will be discussed with central government. Next slide, please. So these are the sort of smart growth related actions for Tauranga City Council to consider. There are other actions in the report. I think the key one is that smart growth partners should be looking for additional growth areas outside the council's district. I don't think it would be prudent to just rely on intensification of Tauranga as a way of providing additional capacity in the future. Really, because intensification takes a long time to actually bed into a place. And if you think back to the slide that you looked at just recently about the increase in building consents in Auckland from about 2016 onwards, that's after many years of individual councils and after amalgamation providing for intensive development within Auckland, and really reflects when the unitary plan zoning took off, and the fact that there were more greenfields areas being opened up, as well as significant intensification happening within right across urban Auckland at that time. I think there's also an opportunity for smart growth to work beyond the Western Bay of Plenty sub-region in terms of looking at additional ways of accommodating for future growth. At the moment, the NPS urban development is very much focused on Tier 1 and 2 councils, either doing expansion of existing urban boundaries or intensification or both. Perhaps it's time we also looked at additional tool, which is encouraging growth in smaller villages and towns, which could be connected with better transport connections. I think Tauranga, so the recommendation was that Tauranga strongly supported the shift that smart growth is doing from focusing on planning towards implementation. And I think there's a number of, knotty issues with implementation that are joined up approach by the Smart Growth partners would benefit from. There's also about cementing more formally each partner's commitment to Smart Growth spatial plan. One of the perceptions or feedback that I got from external parties was that they find it odd that after the identification of priority growth areas within Smart Growth spatial plan, when it comes to plan change processes or consenting processes within those growth priority areas, there is sometimes pushback by another partner, i.e. the regional council or a council, on achieving what's in those plan changes and consenting processes. So there's probably a role for the partners within the Smart Growth to look at ways that they can avoid looking at odds with the outcomes to the community and the development industry. Next slide. Obviously, there's some real opportunities with a combined approach to central government from the Smart Growth Partnership. One is when there, any appropriate regional deal proposal and making sure that any EOI proposal is, is aligned with what's wanting to be achieved through a Smart Growth strategy. There's also a role in including in the current RME reform, better coordination and integration of national direction with clear guidance on how to balance competing requirements. And I think that's a matter that consistently local government needs to raise with central government as it looks at the RMA reform. And also I think there is a role for really pushing the question about why does 30 years worth of capacity have to be feasible and reasonably expected? Is it better that feasibly and reasonably expected requirement is focused on the first 1 to 15 years, and beyond that, it's more about identifying the growth areas, getting on with the zoning and the structure planning, and getting infrastructure ready, recognising that there might be opportunities through technical improvements to make things that are not feasible now, but in 15 to 30 years' time, potentially are. The next slide, please. Other things that Smart Growth could work on in advocacy to central government, the alternative financing and funding sources for local governments. In Tauranga, and I must admit I don't know if this happens across the rest of the Western Bay plenty, but there's a lot of private covenants that have been applied, particularly to new greenfield development, which actually restricts the opportunity to do more than one unit per site, even under the medium residential density standards. And councils can't remove those private covenants. So I think it would be useful if central government looked at ideally preventing the application of private covenants on areas identified in future development strategies, and also potentially looking at a sunset clause for existing private covenants. Otherwise, what you're getting is a lot of greenfield development, which is basically urban sprawl, which is not going to provide choices in the future for people who want to stay in their area and could if there were apartments or townhouses, because the land is all privately covenanted for single houses. And I also think there's a role for Smart Growth to encourage central government to be accountable for committing to and delivering at the agreed time the central government's infrastructure that is required to enable service growth. And also, it's a bit rich to imply consequences for councils that don't meet 30-year feasible development capacity requirements, when actually it's central governments that is partially or usually contributing to that situation by failing to provide on-time critical infrastructure. Next slide. So that basically is a very rapid snapshot of some of the issues that I identified in the review, and I'm happy to answer any questions the committee might have.
Great, thanks Penny for the presentation, and let's now, as you suggest, move to questions. James.
Thank you. Penny, one thing that I think would be really great for the sub-region is that the NPSUD development capacity needs to be looked at on a sub-regional basis. And that's something that I've advocated to the Minister on. And I just wanted your views on that, because, you know, as Tauranga runs out of physical space, you know, providing 30 years of capacity is literally impossible. And I think the rules around the NPSUD on that are unnecessarily restrictive. But I just wanted your views and how best to go about changing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think having either sub-regional or regional capacity is worth having a look at. I think the catching point for Tauranga is the fact that the 30 years capacity has to be currently reasonably and feasibly reasonably realised and feasible, which is, as I've said, difficult to actually, work out over the 15 to 30 year period because of a range of things. But having it as a sub-region would obviously mean that there is some wriggle room there, but my understanding is even as a region, there is currently still a shortfall to meet the current definition of that 30 years capacity.
Thank you.
Any further questions, comments, matters that people wish to raise for further discussion? Nothing further? All right. Penny, thanks very much indeed for the report and for the presentation of it. We've obviously got some smart growth related actions that appeared on some of those later slides there. We've got the TCC resolutions in relation to that are in Craig's cover report, and some specific recommendations for smart growth coming out of TCC that then translate into recommendations at the end of our own paper today. So, Craig, did you have any comments that you wanted to make on your cover paper and any of those recommendations that have come through from the report as we've just seen it?
No, not specifically. I mean, there was a couple of items, one around referring this report to the development sector group for feedback. And that would have happened a couple of weeks ago, but their meeting was deferred, so that'll be next year. So just be aware of that. And the other recommendation there is just to sort of wrap up the recommendations that come through from Penny's report into a review of the sort of setup of smart growth in the new year. So those matters that are in there will be effectively become the terms of reference or part of the terms of reference for that checking in, rather than sort of trying to scramble around trying to respond to those issues now. I thought it was potentially better to sort of wrap those up into something more comprehensive.
Yep, so that'll report back in the next meeting cycle.
Yes.
Yep. Tapio.
Kia ora, Penny, and to the previous presenters. I was just thought in terms of the recommendations that are there in Craig's covering report, and Whitiora touched on it briefly, is the I suppose is the recognition, the opportunity to monitor the development on multiply owned Māori land across TCC in Western Bay. So I think just wondering whether we can add in a 2C into the recommendations that would read something along the lines of that we would provide an addendum report that would provide the monitoring of development on multiply owned Māori land. So I know that Andy and Ave, and work that we've done during the last year, have collated the number of consents on multi-land Māori land. I think if we've got Papakainga as one of our PDAs, we need to have a benchmark to monitor from. And so the tangata whenua reps were discussing the opportunity, how do we do that? And I think part of this, where we've got these annual reports coming in, is that there needs to be a section or a component of the report that addresses the issues surrounding multi-land Māori land. I know Penny in her report does make reference, and I suppose it does come back to the scope, Penny. You referenced the purpose of the report was around urban. And while we have a few Papakainga that are urban based, Te Reti, in terms of Haireni, Kaitimako, and there are definitely areas that are that you've identified, and obviously the first one that you identified was the potential in Matapihi. TCC will have fond memories of discussions with Matapihi and around I suppose the caveats or the covenants around how the Matapihi Peninsula wants to be brought into, I suppose, the next era or next generation of their Matapihi land use plan. But I think that we do have an opportunity with this report, with the previous report, bringing in the consenting numbers, that demonstrates that we do have a serious issue, in the material that Andy and Nave brought or produced, the number of consents. And so this isn't including the consents that were issued for the retirement villages that Ngā are developing across the road from the marae and on their private development. What we're focusing on are those Papakainga that our Māori land trusts and marae are providing. And I think we need to capture that data so that we all collectively sitting around this table have a benchmark to move forward on. And so that figure from the stats that were collected from 2001 to 2023, June last year, were 170 homes. So that only works to 7.3 homes per year. And in 2005, we didn't have any homes. There's a big fat zero next to it. And then it goes from zero. The next year was 2 homes being built, then 3, then 4s. So you can actually see that there's a significant barrier around our potential. So we have 700 hectares of multi-land Māori land in TCC. What's stopping us unlocking? Penny's report makes that recommendation around looking outside of TCC. Well, I'm saying, yes, we can look outside over to Western Bay, but we still have the opportunity to utilise the 700 hectares of multi-land Māori land. And yes, I know Te Tumu is challenging, but unless, and I know TCC have done a lot of work, but there are other blocks that make up that 700 hectares, and the amount of rurally based whenua in the Western Bay is significant. They have the largest number of marae. So, they're 24 marae in the Western Bay. TCC have 11, sorry. They have 11 marae, 6 rural, 5 urban. And all I'm saying is that the report should be reflecting that as well, that there's potential in those areas, in those communities. We just look across over there to Marapihi, loads of potential over there that we need to work through. So I'm just saying that there's a potential for 2C to be included in there, to recognise the opportunity to monitor the work and development on multi-land Māori land.
So your suggestion was that we add a 2C, that additional monitoring be added on the development of housing on Māori land. And the other suggestion is that the report be provided to the development sector group, but the report also could be provided to the combined Tangata Whenua forum in the same way for discussion in that forum as well.
Yes, absolutely. We were just talking as we were going through the report of bringing some of the, while they weren't the slides that were brought up and on screen in the reports, there's some good summary data there on a collection of those slides that I think would be appropriate to put into our He Pito Pito Kōrero, which is the Combined Tangata Whenua Forum newsletter, which we hope to get out before the end of this year over the next couple of days. But I think it's just grabbing their attention around the stats and the material that's in the reports, raising them at the combined forum that, you know, in 2025, when we're here in 12 months' time, that we're reading the 25 report, we'll have some data about Multiply and Māori land.
So if your suggestion, with the agreement of the room, if your suggestions were acceptable, that would see recommendation 1 as it stands, recommendation 2A, that the report be provided to the development sector group and the combined Tangata Whenua forum. Is there generally agreement to add the combined Tangata Whenua forum in there? If there is, then we can do that. So that would just add the words, so development sector group and combined Tangata Whenua forum for discussion and feedback at their next meetings. And then the 2C to PO that you're suggesting, and I may have paraphrased it, if you want to change the wording, let me know, that additional monitoring of development of housing on Māori land be added.
Fine.
It's fine?
Yeah.
So again, with the agreement of the room, if people are generally comfortable with that, we would add that wording as a 2C. And people are nodding their heads. I think there's general agreement that we do that. Okay, so that's additional monitoring of development of housing on Māori land be added. Great. All right. Thank you very much. Is there any other comment or questions or discussion that people want to raise before we move to close this one out? Nothing further that people want to raise. So we've got those resolutions in front of us on page 81 with the amendments that we've just discussed. Can I have a mover for the resolution? So Matire moves, Whitiora seconds. All those in favour say aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you. And Penny, once again, thank you for joining us and for your flexibility around your ability to join us at a particular time in the meeting. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, and I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a restful New Year. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so that now brings us to the end of our open agenda. I'm going to suggest that we take a short break before we move into public excluded. Given that we're running a little bit early, maybe a 15-minute break and come back at 10:45. At which point we'll pass the resolution and move into public excluded and then deal with the PX items. So I'll adjourn until 10:45. Thank you.